son of Queen Marika, weapon of mass destruction, loving brother, an individual whose name was never meant to be spoken again, an individual whose fate was chosen for them, destined to live a life of autonomy, and destined to leave a legacy of nothing but blood, flame, and ruin in a tortured land erased from history. This is the tragedy of Messmer the Impaler. And if you enjoy these types of videos, consider liking and subscribing to consecrate the algorithm. Welcome to Purge Evil. Thank you for stopping by. Let's get into it. Possibly Marika's firstborn, Messmer, at the very least, is one of the oldest of the demigod children. Commonly for a child of Marika though, Messmer was born cursed, fated to bear the weight of his mother's sins. He was born with a type of flame inside of him, as well as a destructive serpent that sought to consume this flame and Messmer himself. Marika, in an effort to prevent her son from being destroyed from within, and to prevent her fear of this serpent from having the possibility of becoming too powerful, and I suppose being the loving parent that she is, contained the serpent to a degree by removing Messmer's right eye and replacing it with a seal created from grace. We learn this from Messmer's remembrance description, which reads, "A malevolent snake writhed within Messmer, and so his very mother plucked out his eye and put in its place a seal of grace." This is a very clear indication that whatever the serpent is, it is a direct contradiction to the light of the Erdtree. Messmer would later title this being the Abyssal Serpent, though it's also referred to as the base serpent from other sources. I have some crazy headcanon for this that I might touch on in another video, but you can sort of view the serpent as the physical embodiment of darkness itself, of the void, of the abyss. Essentially, it is the base of existence. Think Dark Souls. It is unclear who Messmer's father actually was, and many believe it to be Radagon, as there are several pieces of evidence to suggest this, though it is still up for debate. Even so, he was born cursed, he's got the red hair, his soundtrack has the same motif, and the whole butterfly thing, so make of it what you will. From the Messmer's kindling item description, an item used to burn the sealing tree, we read, "The kindling that burned inside Messmer the Impaler, a dark thing, eaten away at by a wicked serpent." So even with the serpent being contained, it was still powerful enough to gnaw at Messmer's flame, and with enough time it would probably still have consumed him. This item also reads, "Messmer, much like his younger sister, bore a vision of fire." This younger sister is likely his twin, or was born shortly after Messmer, and it's essentially confirmed his younger sister was Melina, who was also born cursed, and who also has the capability of deforestation. Messmer was forced to live with this fire ever burning inside of him, and despite his control over it and continued use of its power, Messmer despised this flame. We learn this from the Messmer's orb description, which reads, "Messmer despised his own fire. Time and time again, he hoped to rid himself of it, but ever did it burn." We also learn that not only was he born with a ferocious flame and a ravenous serpent, but he was also accompanied by the winged snakes we see him with for most, if not all of his life. From the Messmer's helm description, we read, "The winged snakes were Messmer's constant companions. They were there when the base serpent was sealed away behind his eye. They were there through his eternity of suffering. They will accompany him yet in his hideous new form born when he destroyed the grace granted by his mother. They have accepted his fate as much as he." This sort of reminds me of Radahn and his horse, and it could also have something to do with why Radahn looked at Leonard the way he did. Yes, Leonard, not Leonard. Maybe that's my own headcanon, but we do know that other people are aware of these snakes and are even fond of them. We learn this with the winged serpent being the symbol of his forces, and from the serpent helm, which reads, "Helm of Khud, captain of the Fire Knights. A winged serpent perches atop it. The winged serpent is the token creature of Messmer's military forces. It is a wise friend which keeps the base serpent at bay and holds its power in check." From this, we learn that it goes even a bit deeper, that the snakes are somehow able to help hold back the base serpent. Long before the Shattering, and before the Crusade in the realm of Shadow, Messmer was very much around during the reign of the Golden Order. He's even been implied to have been a person that several of the others looked up to, including Radahn himself. While not full-blooded siblings and possibly not even aware that they're related due to the nature of Marika and Radagon, Messmer would act as an older brother to Radahn in his younger days, and we learn this from the remembrance of the Wild Boar Rider, which reads, "Remembrance of Commander Gaius, hewn into the Shadow Tree. Both were as elder brothers to the Lion, and both were cursed from birth. In spite of,
or perhaps because of this very reason, Gaius was both Messmer's friend and the leader of his men. The lion in this, of course, referring to Radahn. Messmer inspired his men and those around him, and it's heavily suggested that he cared for them as well, even the ones that would later betray him, as referenced in the Black Knight Captain Hugh Ashes, which states, "The Black Knights were the primary force of Messmer's army. Second to their first knight commander was Hugh, a man with agile command of both twin blade techniques and the power of the crucible, and whose spirit in these ashes dwells. Though a champion of the divine beast hunt, he followed his father Andreas into rebellion against Messmer, and like his father, he too was imprisoned in an underground tomb. Messmer mourned the loss of a brother in arms." This final line, of course, revealing Messmer's humanity. R'hllana was a Carian princess and younger sister to Queen Rennala, and even she would set aside her future to follow Messmer. We learn this from her remembrance, which reads, "Once a Carian princess, R'hllana disavowed her birthright and chose to stand at Messmer's side instead, knowing full well that not even the brilliance of the moon could grant him succor. Before long, she became known as the Sword of Messmer." An interesting note is that even in her defection, Rennala would not disown her, which we learn from R'hllana's helm that reads, "Rennala, head of the royal family of Caria, was said to have given her younger sister, who renounced her lineage to chase after Messmer, a gift of lustrous black hair." I believe Rennala did this because she relates to her younger sister, being that she was married to Radagon. We can easily see the correlation between them and R'hllana and Messmer. We also know that many of his soldiers revered him, and some were close enough to Messmer that they knew of his abyssal secret, which we learn from the Fire Knight armor description, which reads, "Armor of the Fire Knights under Messmer the Impaler's personal command, distinguished by its red cape and twin golden snakes which adorn the neck, enhancing incantations of Messmer's flame." These were the only ones who truly knew Messmer, his flames like serpents, the painful fate that accompanied his cursed form. So these high-ranking knights not only knew of his true nature, but wielded his very flame. One of the knights later on during the tail end of the Crusade would even go so far as to attempt to resurrect the dead using Messmer's flame, and with some success, which we observe and learn from the description of the Death Mask helm that reads, "Helm of Wego, elder among the Fire Knights." Gnawed at by loneliness, the old man turned his attention to the spirituality of Messmer's flame, using it in a rite of resurrection. Yet the soulless bodies he brought back to life were no comfort to poor Wego. Being that his flame can bring the dead to life, this obviously confirms that Messmer's flame is connected to the undead of Dark Souls. With all of this, we can observe that Messmer was not always this figure of hatred and destruction, but he may have actually been a very different person before he became known as the Impaler. He inspired his forces so much that even those of noble blood would turn away from the Erdtree itself in favor of following him, which we learn from the Fire Knight helm that reads, "Pointed helm of the Fire Knights under Messmer the Impaler's personal command." Each and every knight hailed from the renowned family of the Erdtree's upper echelons, but were shunned and chased from their homes after pledging allegiance to Messmer as their master. The fact that they had to be shunned and chased away from their homes just for following Messmer has to say something about the inspiration that this man can give off. This leads us to the infamous Crusade, the genocide of an entire culture of people, and the subsequent years of abandonment. Marika, in all her golden glory, held with her a secret, and this secret would be the ruin of Messmer and those who followed him. Long ago, before Marika was even a god, she was born a mortal and a shaman, who lived in the shaman village before she escaped and ascended to godhood using the divine gate. This is very clearly evidenced by the golden braid and the minor Erdtree incantation found in this very location, both of which previously belonging to Marika herself, but we'll get into those descriptions in just a moment. The potentates that inhabit Bonny Village engage in a foul ritual that requires the murder and butchering of Marika's shaman people, jamming them into jars with the bodies of criminals. A ghost in the village states, "For pity's sake, your place is in the jar. Nigh sainthood itself awaits you within. For shamans like you, this is your lot. Life were you accorded for this alone." The shaman people were specifically used in these bizarre jar rituals because, according to the description of the Tooth Whip, the flesh of shamans was said to meld harmoniously with others. The Hornsent believe this ritual will purify those within, transforming them into saints. What they actually become are these twisted amalgamations of flesh and soul who exist pathetically in the jails they're born in. The description of the innard meat which they use to attack you and which drops after killing them reads, "Scraps of flesh for filling great jars. Rancorous spirits cling to the pinkish red, twitching meat. Throw at enemies to inflict damage. This is what becomes of the condemned who get sliced up and stuffed into jars to become saints instead." Absolutely disgusting. Over time, the entirety of the shaman people would be killed off, as seen in-game when we arrive and no one is there, apart from the duo of the Erdtree Sentinels, very far from the shaman we'd expect to see. The minor Erdtree incantation description reads, "Secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold without order. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal." The golden braid description reads, "A braid of golden hair cut loose. Queen Marika's offering to the grandmother. What was her prayer? Her wish? Her confession? There is no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again." As stated in both of these descriptions, the shaman people have been gone for ages, even before Marika had returned with her divine power. The only remnants left of them being the primary bodies of the jar innards found inside the jails, evidenced by their blindfolded, long-haired feminine appearance, as well as the carving upon their forehead, which is a replication of Marika's rune, or perhaps it's the other way around. Marika, now a god, has the power and resources to rid these treacherous beings of their vile existence. When asking Leda about the Hornsent, we learned that Marika had given the order to Messmer to embark on a religious crusade to sanctify the impure.
Long ago, Queen Marika commanded Sir Messmer to purge the Tower folk, a cleansing by fire. It's no wonder the Hornsent holds the Erdtree in contempt. That aside, man is by nature a creature of conquest, and in this regard, the Tower folk are no different. They were never saints. They just happened to be on the losing side of a war, but it's still a wretched shame.
Messmer would willingly put himself into the role of the Impaler. He wasn't simply just murdering the Hornsent and burning their dwellings. No, he would torture them and brutalize them, leaving them skewered around the battlefield, becoming the embodiment of fear. We learn this from Messmer's armor description, which reads, "On his mother's wishes, Messmer made himself a symbol of fear, undertaking the cleansing crusade she desired." Messmer's soldiers were equally as evil in their methods, if not worse. We learn this in the description of the Crusaders' insignia, which also confirms that this was not a war fought with honor, this was a bloodbath. The talisman reads, "The warriors who fought in the crusade set aside both honor and mercy to wantonly impale and scorch those deemed impure. Those who felt invigorated by each cry of death were the same men who were certain of the sanctity of the campaign." We also learn of their torturous methods from the description of one of their weapons, the Serpent flail, which reads, "A flail with coiled snakes for bludgeoning heads. Fire roars within the snakes' bodies, inflicting horrible burns." Some of Messmer's army used these flails to burn Hornsent, to brand them with agony and fear. The armor the Crusaders wore was as black as their souls would become, but adorning their armor was a shadow tree engraving lined with gold. From the description, we learn this is meant to be a small consolation to those forced to wage a war without grace or honor. We further learn about these soldiers from their ashes description, which reads, "These soldiers belonged to the ignoble penal battalion and were buried, hidden from the shadow tree's sight." So now that we know that these lower ranked soldiers are just criminals who were forced to be here, and we know that some of these soldiers didn't particularly enjoy what they were doing despite their loyalty, which is also mentioned with one of Messmer's personal fire knights, Salza. He was uniquely skilled in wielding Messmer's flame, and from the description of his unique incantation, Rain of Fire, we read, "Salza's disdain for barbarism never waned, even as he burned more villages and scorched more land than any other." Remorseful or not, the Crusaders were just as devout in their cause as Messmer was, to purge these lands of the graceless in Marika's name. They would bring their own culture with them to replace the old, raising statues of Marika, and even a church of the Crusade. But erasing the Hornsent from existence was not Marika's only goal, however. No, her other, likely more important mission was to banish her son Messmer, and along with him, the base Serpent. We learned of her fear from Messmer's remembrance, which reads, "Her fear compelled her to secret away her child within the realm of shadow, hidden away, keeping company with the original sin, and a hatred that would not be confined. She would cut all communication, veiling the land in shadow, cutting it off from the rest of the lands between, and abandoning her son." At some point, Messmer's men realized this and began beheading statues of Marika, and while some remained loyal to Messmer, others would rebel after learning about Messmer's base serpent that dwells within him, even some of his most trusted men. From the Black Knight commander Andreas Ash's description, we read, "The Black Knights were the primary force of Messmer's army. Their first leader was Andreas, a man endowed with great strength and command over the powers of the Crucible. Though he remained a devout follower of Messmer after his flight from the Erdtree, he would rebel after learning of his liege's serpentine nature. His righteous stand was rewarded with imprisonment in an underground tomb." There were other Black Knights that never faltered, however, as explained with the Black Steel Great Shield description, which reads, "Made of black steel with decorative embellishments in gold. Symbolic of their iron conviction in their crusade, the Black Knights will never yield, nor will they ever doubt their purpose. Though they never doubted their purpose, we read that their souls have possibly become blackened after the atrocities they've committed, evidenced in their helmet's description, which reads, black iron ornamented with gold. A rotten odor stubbornly clings to it. Perhaps it arises from the tainted nature of the blood that splattered upon it, or perhaps it is the wearer's own blackened soul, festering after endless slaughter." From Messmer's armored description, a quote from the man himself reads, "Direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief towards me alone." So, with everything, he took the hatred his crusaders bore for Marika in the crusade upon himself so that he alone would suffer the blame, for it is him who led them to eternal suffering and damnation. Now earlier, I displayed some evidence as to why Radagon may be Messmer's father, but it could be possible that he doesn't even have a father, that Marika created him purely by herself, as gods are known to give birth in strange ways. I believe this could describe Messmer's extreme loyalty and devotion to his mother and her cause, even in her abandonment, all the way up until his final moments. Aside from dialogue, this can be seen in-game by the statue behind Messmer's throne. A statue of Marika depicting her holding an infant, and unlike almost every other statue of her in the Shadow Realm, this statue has not been beheaded, meaning that Messmer still held out hope that she would return, and that he was still loyal to her even in her betrayal, acting out her will for many, many years, seemingly without question. A great example of this is the dialogue from Messmer when the Tarnished enters his chambers.
Mongrel intruder. That tarnished, it seemeth. Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light? Yet, my purpose standeth unchanged. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. In the embrace of Messmer's flame.
Here, he notices we are tarnished, without grace, yet we have become Elden Lord. This is essentially blasphemy, yet Messmer remains steadfast in his devotion to Marika's orders. The irony being that Messmer himself is without grace, as displayed in just a moment. Messmer engages in battle with the Tarnished, only to be pushed to the brink, leaving him with only one option. In a desperate attempt to not soil his mother's cause, he destroys the seal of grace granted to him by his mother and unleashes the abyssal serpent.
I will not suffer. a lord devoid of light. No, Mother, forgive me. Soon tarnished. Wilt thou be taken in the jaws of the abyssal serpent, shorn of light?
The power of the Serpent and Flame are not enough to overcome the Tarnished, however, and the battle swiftly comes to a close with the defeat of the Impaler. The closing of a ruthless, torturous chapter of the forgotten history of these hidden away lands. With his dying breath, he curses the selfish one responsible for breeding him into this life of sin, hatred, and destruction.
Marika, a curse upon thee.
In Messmer's death, the Tarnished is able to use his flame to burn the sealing tree that hides the path to the Gate of Divinity and relinquish Miquella of his duties. Depending on perspective, you can kind of look at this as a sort of redemption for Messmer. Destined to a life of atrocity, Messmer was misguided, abandoned, and erased. Truly a tale of tragedy that probably many of us can relate to on some levels, aside from the whole genocide part, of course. So let me know your thoughts down below, and do you think Messmer was actually evil? Did he enjoy what he did, or did he just do it because he was the best mama's boy? Like and subscribe for more lore. Thank you for watching, and until next time, purge evil.